Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep, co-founder and chief content officer of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to today's webinar, which will focus on solving miscommunication at scale. Before we get started, From Day One is partnered with AARP to develop a family caregiving survey to gather data around employer support of workers with family caregiving responsibilities. I'm putting a link to that survey in the chat now, and we hope you'll take a few moments to complete it. For today's attendees, that's you, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for our monthly virtual conference. It's coming up on December 7th. That conference is titled The Future of Jobs, Trends Shaping How We Work in 2023 and Beyond. During that event, we'll be discussing how the traditional corporate jobs have evolved since the pandemic, how these changes have affected both employers and employees, and what practices, benefits, and digital tools will be the most important going forward. I'm putting a link in the chat space to access complimentary VIP tickets to that virtual conference, which includes access to the whole day's activities. The regular price for conference tickets is $149, so don't miss out on this opportunity. Hope we'll see you there. Now, today we'll be exploring the topic, solving miscommunication at scale. Evolution has limited our ability to build deep connective relationships. As a result, we're prone to miscommunication, lack of trust, and poorly inclusive work environments. Wahl, founder and CEO of Attuned, will discuss today how nudges coupled with psychology and artificial intelligence and delivered at scale can solve and help eliminate the exponential and costly miscommunications that develop in large and growing organizations. Today's webinar is presented with support from Attuned. I'll tell you a bit about them. Drawing on decades of academic research into the psychology behind intrinsic motivation, Attuned's AI-powered software makes the hidden values that drive people visible. This allows managers to understand their teams on a whole new level, offering insights and actions to enhance communication, to boost engagement and productivity, and ultimately make work more meaningful. Now, a few quick logistical items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. The same email will have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from both the Society of Human Resource Management and the HR Certification Institute. And look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromdayone.co. During the webinar, we'll also have an opportunity for Q&A with the speakers. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Emily McCrary-Ruiz-Esparza. Emily is a freelance reporter based in Richmond, Virginia, who writes about workplace culture and policies, hiring, DEI, and issues faced by women. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, Fast Company, and Food Technology, among others, and has been syndicated by MSN and The Motley Fool. Okay, Emily and Casey, take it away.
Thank you, Steve, for that kind introduction. And Casey, thank you for being here with us today. I'd like to start by, if you'll tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and where you're joining us from and what time it is.
Of course, I'm excited to be here. This is what gets me out of bed, right? So I'm an entrepreneur, a founder. I actually lived in Japan for quite a while, grew up kind of all around the world, but American, and still get into the US a lot. And my family is in Texas. And now we're taking Attuned globally. So from a base here, we have team members all over the world and growing this. And right now it is 4:15 or 4 something a.m. here in Japan.
Well, I appreciate that, the fact that you're willing to communicate with us today despite the time difference. So let's begin by talking about what it is that's getting in the way of our ability to build deep connective relationships at work. Why is that difficult now?
I think it's always been difficult, but like with the scale of things and the speed of things, it's getting more exponentially difficult. So we have kind of two bigger forces. You can almost kind of think of them like as natural forces going against each other. So on one side, like limiting us, we have our brains and our evolutionary kind of the development of our brains over hundreds of thousands of years that we're only able to really keep track of and understand a certain amount of people. So there's an evolutionary psychologist, Dunbar. I think a lot of us have heard of Dunbar's number, and that's 150. So 150 is generally the average number of people that a human can kind of keep track of, know their names, know their face, and feel a collective identity to. So this is why, the military or different businesses puts business units or group at 150, because identity ties start to break down once you get past that. But what's kind of not known is there's a few other numbers. So there's 5, there's 15, and there's 50 within these kind of Dunbar numbers. So 5 is the group, your inner core of people that you're emotionally attached to, like deeply attached to. Then there's 15, and these are 15 there where you kind of know what makes them work. You know them well enough that, okay, if I do this, this is going to be their behavior. This is how they're going to feel about things. There's a deeper emotional connection, not as much as the 5, like core group, but still quite a deep connection. And then there's about 50 which you would invite to a party, and those are kind of the 4 kind of circles of Dunbar's number. And it's that number 15 that's really kind of restricting us. So I think once we get into the workplace, if we have direct reports, if we're a manager, if we're a leader, like, can we keep track of what motivates Mike or what motivates Sarah, type of thing like that? And how can we understand what's going on in their life? What are all the dynamics behind that? And we have this, then you get our friends involved, our family involved beyond that kind of core 5. And we get to the limitation of how much our brains can really understand, how much we can pick up, how much we can remember. So that's kind of one side of things. And then on the other side, as organizations get bigger, and obviously with more technology, the amount of interactions actually goes faster than the number of people that go. So it kind of scales at a super linear pace. So if you take a 100-person organization and an 800-person organization, it's not just 7 times faster, meaning the organization kind of linearly goes up, but it's 11 times faster. So the more people you keep interacting with, okay, we're going to get more, Microsoft Teams messages or Slack messages or emails or calls that we have to kind of get on. So all of this busyness is limiting our original kind of brain capacity to keep track and really understand and motivate and build those deep connective relationships with our team. And then beyond that is we can't see a lot of the data, like the important stuff that's going on. How is this person feeling emotionally? What is really important to them in life? Like, that's just not visible for us. And most of us don't have the techniques to pick it up. So a combination of all of those things is really just makes miscommunication foment horribly at scale.
I would imagine if you have coworkers or direct reports who you've never met in person, who you don't see face to face on a daily basis, that's going to make it more difficult to form a meaningful relationship. Do you think that's true?
Yes, but not definitively so. I think, when we get into person, there is something that happens when we're face to face, right? There's a lot more data and a lot more energy and a lot more kind of information happening between our bodies, happening in the space between us, so we can pick up more. So there's more body language that kind of adds context to what is being spoken to when you're doing that. But you can still build a deep relationship pretty quickly. But this is where we're creating Attuned, and to help give people that information that you need to build quick relationships. So if we're working together for the first time, Emily, we haven't met, I'm stuck over here in Japan, type of thing like that. We can't get together for that team meeting or whatever it is, that if you can use something where you can see my values, you can see what's most important to me, and we can have an honest conversation pretty quickly, then we can break through some of those things much, much faster.
Before we get into talking about how you might be able to see someone's values or understand that, tell me what happens when miscommunication or communication is imperfect, strained, not going very well. What does it do at work on the individual level, and what does it create scaled up on the company level? What are the effects?
I think just generally it sucks is kind of the way to do it. It manifests itself in many different ways. I mean, it can go from the scale of, why is Mike, I'm going to use Mike's name, why is Mike giving me grief about this? And you're using your emotional energy to understand, why is there friction in this kind of easy interaction? If I speak to Sarah, if I speak to Bill about this, it's going to go pretty smoothly. But Mike is questioning, I have to have 3 more meetings. We already have a policy. He agreed to it, but now he doesn't want to implement it. it. So that can be it. So it's taking a lot of time, it's taking a lot of energy to do this. If you're having miscommunication and you're assigning what you think you're communicating clearly to somebody, okay, here's the objective, here's the goal, this is why they're doing it, but they receive a different message and they're not as motivated, or you have to redo the whole brief type of thing, or somebody feels like, why am I always getting the short end of the stick? I don't want to do this particular project or this particular job, and they're not going to overcome challenges. So what happens as you get to the company level, it's going to be a more fragile company. It's going to be less resilient because people aren't together. They're not totally trusting. They're not communicative. Things aren't as transparent. People are holding back. You're not going to be able to innovate as quickly. You're going to have more mistakes as you get to scale. So there are actually numbers and research around it. So miscommunication costs a 100-person company just 400, just simple miscommunications, like $400,000 a year. As you get into like 100,000 person, it's like 60 million plus that you're getting to. And then on the productivity side, per person in your company, it costs $26,000 plus, because they're having miscommunication and these frictions are happening, and you're getting grief from somebody when you feel you shouldn't. So it slows you down from doing the most important things. So it really costs time and money and potentially mistakes.
I imagine emotional labor. I've definitely worked with Mike. No offense to the Mike.
Sorry, Mike.
Yeah. But I've worked with that person who you go into the meeting and you think, I'm already coming at this defensively because I know what our relationship is. I know it's contentious. I know we don't get along. There's a lot of friction here. So, and it affects, that 15 minutes before the meeting, right? You're already gearing up and hardening up to fight poor Mike. Okay, so.
And that's horrible. And I think we all have that, right?
Yes, it's a terrible feeling, and it can just kind of ruin interactions, projects. It can ruin a whole workday. So earlier you talked about understanding someone's values and how knowing what someone else values can, make communication more open, more smooth. Talk more about that.
Yeah, let's I kind of want to use a customer story for this, if you don't mind. So like using kind of the example of Mike, let's go back to Mike. So Mike had agreed to a policy that, so one of our customers, that every time an employee leaves, they have to rekey their facilities. So their offices have to get rekeyed. And the company agreed to this. All of the leaders agreed to this. And the origination is maybe 9 months ago, somebody left, probably disgruntled, didn't leave on good terms. And it seems that person who left went into the facility, stole some things, vandalized things, and it was disruptive. It was unsettling. Obviously, it cost money. So all the regional directors, everybody kind of in charge, okay, we're going to rekey buildings. This makes sense. We don't want this to happen again every time somebody leaves. So just recently, somebody else left. And, let's call him Mike, didn't want to rekey. It's like, okay, we just did this 3 months ago. Why do we have to do this right now? And kind of the head of operations, who's responsible to make sure this goes, says, well, this is the policy. This is what we need to do. And Mike's like, no, I don't want to. We just did this. This isn't a priority type of thing. And I think this communication where you're not getting it, where you're not understanding, okay, Mike doesn't really care about following the processes. It's not so important for him. Somebody in operations, very important for following the processes. So a relatively simple thing about getting a facility rekeyed. And the interesting part was, okay, it was the exact same facility that this new this new lever left from. So it was the same building that was happening, but still don't want to kind of follow the policy. Like, it's not the most important thing. Let's drive revenue. Let's do something else. So this is a really kind of small indication where it should be easy. We agree to it. It's written down. The director is saying, just do it. This is what it is. But Mike, for example, doesn't want to do this kind of rekeying of it. And that's a conflict of values, right? So I think if we put it into the 11 intrinsic motivations, 11 values that kind of we've identified here at Attuned, Mike doesn't have high security needs. He doesn't really want to follow processes. Like, following processes are not important. It's going to be something else that gets him excited and goes about his decision making at work. On the operations team, that's what we need to do: follow processes, have a kind of secure way of doing things. And that's how they start communicating, not respecting the other person's stance and not really understanding what the other person's values are, even though it is on a piece of paper, even though they kind of agree to it. And this type of misunderstanding, because we can't see why somebody's approaching a problem a particular way, happens all the time because we just generally don't have this information available to us.
I think you're just sort of talking about this lack of awareness, right? You don't realize that Mike's not doing this to be difficult. Poor Mike, whoever Mike is, like taking on it.
Apologies, Mike.
Right. Assuming that he's doing it to be obstinate or to be difficult, rather than the fact that he may not even realize that he's valuing something different. There was an Axios study, 2022, this fall, and the results of it, among many, were this: 74% of communication leaders, so in companies, say that their communication is concise and effective and clear, but only 40% of their employees agreed with that statement. And I think that's exactly what's happening there. Someone assumes that maybe their direct reports or their employees are going to receive communication the same way. We do this in our relationships outside of work. Spousal relationships or romantic partnerships are a perfect example, where you're much more generous to your partner, or hopefully, understanding their values. Why don't we bring this into the workplace?
That's a good question. I think that's cultural and what is expected of the workplace. That maybe there is carryover from kind of the industrial age, like, okay, work and family are separate. There is a dividing line between this. And that's still a mentality that I think is quite pervasive, that, these two things are separate and distinct, and probably to a certain degree they should be. You should act a different way at work than you might act at home, right? But then you have all of the demands of work. Okay, we have goals, we have KPIs, we have deliverables, we have customer problems, we have so many things that we have to deal with that we forget these relationship building things. And even in your romantic partnerships or your long-term relationships, when was the last time you asked, what's important to you? What do you want life to be like together, or in our friendship, or with us as partners 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Like, to stop back from all of the logistics or planning and everything that kind of goes around to really understand that person deeply. And usually we don't have that at the forefront of our brains. And I think that's even less so at work. So when you're feeling this anxiety and you're hopping from call to call, in today's kind of hybrid or remote one, that's not the first thing that comes to mind, and it might seem weird, and it takes a little bit of courage to even ask, like, okay, well, this is not the question I get in a meeting. Why are you asking me what's important to me, Emily? This is strange. And I think we need to make this more of the culture so that we can understand a little bit people more deeply. And this, again, goes back to that limitation, right? We think we know people. And it goes back to that Axios data that you mentioned, is we assume a lot more that we understand what's going on with people, or we understand what motivates them, and we're just wrong.
So when you're talking about values, can you give some examples that Attuned, those values that you've identified, so that our audience knows? Are we talking about, you mentioned financial earlier, someone values financial gain. What are some other values that you've identified among people?
So our team of psychologists, we identified 11 kind of universal values that you look at, and things kind of can fit into those to sub-values, but you're looking like financial needs, like status, which is kind of respect. I go to work to get respect out of that. Social relationships, autonomy, competition, altruism. And these all go up to about 11, and everybody's value set for work is different. So the chance that you meet somebody with a generally similar motivational profile, a similar value hierarchy, if I get technical, is less than a 1 in a million chance. And everybody is unique because this is all of our lived experiences, and our values are created by our lived experiences. So when you take the assessment, you look at it, it's like, okay, who is Emily today? What is the most important thing for her today? And these change very, very slowly. They don't change quick. And then we learn them from our environment. So are we feeling a big emotional impact from something? And that can change our value set. But those, again, change quite slowly. But I think the key is the uniqueness of it. And some people might have two like really off the chart, like, okay, this is what this person needs. And then some people might be more complicated. They might have 7 or 8 things that they need to have to be motivated. And I think if you're looking from like an organization or a management point, it's like, how can we know this? Like, okay, Casey's might be pretty simple. Just give him something, he's high competition or high autonomy. There you go. This is go do it, Casey, type of thing like that. Whereas somebody else might be quite complicated and you have to hit other buttons to keep them consistently motivated.
Okay, so let's talk about knowing that. Let's start with the self, right? So there was a literature review in the Journal of Education Management. I think it was published last year. And it found that though the concept of self-awareness is ubiquitous across MBAs, leadership development, management education, there's no consistent definition. It's conflated with or used interchangeably with self-consciousness or self-knowledge. But I think the point is that in business, it's very clear that this is important to know oneself and to be aware of one's own tendencies. Should someone begin there and then find out others? Where do you begin in this values exploration?
Exactly, and I think it kind of goes, when you're flying and you're listening to the announcement for the safety announcements, like, okay, put on your own oxygen mask first. And I think this is what it goes to at work, is you need to understand yourself and what is driving your emotions or your feelings or your behaviors. And this is the self-awareness component of it. And I think the benefit for an individual is you're going to make better decisions. If you know this type of project or this type of work or working in this type of team gets me excited, high social relationships is a big motivator for me. So if I can get together in person, or we can have mixers and type of thing, and I'm not isolated in a remote place doing work by myself, and I make the right decision, because I know that I'm going to be much happier, I'm going to bring that happiness to my team. You're also going to be able to advocate for yourself a little bit better. Like, you can communicate clearly what I need. Okay, this is missing, and I understand that it's missing, and I can have the words and I can articulate this so you can potentially get it. But that miscommunication happens, when we meet somebody else, right? Okay, even if we're understanding ourselves, but we're dealing with this black box, yeah, we can probably figure it out a little bit better because we have some context to paint from our own understanding of ourselves, but we're not totally going to figure it out unless we understand them. So I think we need to start with self-awareness, but then it needs to get to mutual awareness if we're really going to solve for all of these miscommunication and misunderstanding and grief and friction that we get when we go to work.
Okay, so how do you do that then? Once everybody is starting to cultivate their self-awareness, how do you start to apply that to cultivate a healthy, encouraging, positive outlook type of communication across a company that becomes habitual? That's such a big question. So after self-awareness, then what?
I think it's very hard. And if we're talking at the company level, and as the sizes get bigger, it gets more and more difficult that you're looking to do this. And the habit part is also hard. So it's not really something I believe that you can solve with training. Like, there's research that says, okay, training, only accounts for about 10% of growth. Like 40% comes from our peers, 40% comes from us being in a situation, outside of our capabilities where we have to grow because to meet the situation. So training's not going to solve it habitually. You can make rules, but people don't always follow the rules. And if you have kind of more independent minded thinkers, they're going to go against the rules, type of thing like that. So you have to build the culture. And then I think you have to build this one-to-one understanding. So you have to do it on two kind of frames to be able to scale it. So the one-to-one where, okay, we as an organization value one-to-one connection. So this mutual awareness, and we're either going to give tools or we're going to try to create methods to do this. So, okay, when Emily and Casey interact, they know each other's values, they know each other's intrinsic motivations. And going back to that, mental limitation, or that neuroscience kind of limitation that we have, that, okay, here, let's give a tool. We need actually a tool, so we have superpower, something like Attune, so we can understand each other and get that one-to-one communication. On the scaling side, to make it a culture, and I think this is what you have to do across an organization, is to make it a culture. So it's the unwritten rules. It's, the way we do things around here, and that can be much more difficult. I think if there's any HR leaders, or kind of leaders of organizations changing a culture or trying to implement a new aspect of a culture, is some of the most difficult stuff that you have to do. And I think within that culture, what you're specifically trying to create is psychological safety. So within every team, that members feel they can take a certain amount of risk, that they can be honest within the team. And if you say, okay, this is what we need to do across all of our teams, across the whole organization, then you're going to have an ability for candor, so for frankness, for honesty within the team. Plus, we're going to understand each person's motivations and values. So we're going to have this very nice combination at scale of teams with psychological safety plus intrinsic motivation. So each individual is being motivated, is being inspired in the way that they need. And you put those two together, then you can potentially do it at scale.
Psychological safety is a very popular topic right now. I hope you could describe for us, what does a workplace look like, what are the behaviors of people in a workplace where employees feel psychologically safe? And what do the behaviors look like in a workplace where they do not feel psychologically safe?
I think the simple part is, like, can you say what you believe to be honest? Like, if you're an individual and you're wondering, is my team psychologically safe? For the most part, people don't have a number. Like, how psychologically safe is it? Like, you can't define it. You can't kind of put a number on it. But I think the feeling that you're looking for is, can I speak up? Can I say something? Okay, I don't know if I have the greatest idea. It's only maybe half baked, but if I say this, is somebody going to make fun of me or shut me down, or, say, hey, Casey, go back to bed, get some more sleep. That just wasn't a very good idea, and then I'm not going to speak up again. So can I express myself, be honest, take that interpersonal risk, is the feeling you have. And if you have to kind of get a little bit of courage, like, oh, I need to say something now, otherwise this project's going to get derailed, that's still okay. That probably means there is a certain degree of, psychological safety as a base. If it's not there, people are quiet. Probably the boss or the leader is the one that's always speaking. They cut people off. Ideas are, raised, and they're just shut down very, very quickly. And you get a quieter environment, or it's the same, voices hogging up all the airtime. And they're not getting feedback that that's what they're doing, type of situation. And what'll happen is, you're not going to have these ideas being crossed, right? Not all the information is good to get all the party. You're not going to make the best decisions. You're going to get less innovation, and potentially you get really big mistakes. So, when you have really dynamic systems and complex systems going on, it's when you have a lack of psychological safety, when you need expertise to make a result happens, whether it's medically or, energy wise type of thing, and people aren't being able to communicate honestly, then you get huge disasters.
We have an audience question that I think would be good for you to address right now. The question is, should we focus on the receivers of communication as well as the senders? So coaching people on how to respond when they get messages that maybe they don't like. I just thought of that when you said, telling that person, hey, you're hogging all the air in the room, or do you realize that in a meeting, you're the only person who speaks up and it's difficult for other people? So should we? My guess is yes. How do we then coach those people?
You're absolutely correct. Like, it is a yes, right? And how do you make it habitual? I think you have to create that psychological safety. You have to create the culture that this is what happens around here. You get feedback if you're not communicating the right way. And like, what you want to do is just say thank you, or it's a yes and statement. Yes, and I'm going to try to get better, or yes, and I didn't know that. So I think kind of part of the question is there can be kind of two types. Like, is somebody just not aware? And it's a lack of awareness that this is what they're doing. And if you present them the feedback, or you present them the information, like, you're not communicating right, to this person or to me type of thing. And they say, oh, I'm so sorry. And a lot of people, and I think most people that we enjoy working with, they, I'd be mortified. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize, I was not communicating to you properly, or wasn't clear because my motivations, my values are very different than yours. Or the people that just totally say, no, I'm not going to do this. And those are the people you probably need to remove from your organization.
Mm. Just a reminder to our audience, we'll be taking questions throughout. So if you do have any questions for Casey, please pop them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll get to as many as we can. So I want to keep talking about maybe some of the more contentious relationships or just difficult interpersonal relationships. It's easy for us to think of the ones that have been really pleasant, the coworkers that we work smoothly with. So what about relationships that have been sour long-term? We've all had these in the workplace, someone that you just don't get along with. People have egos, people can be territorial within a department. People like to get credit for the work they've done, and maybe they're not willing to give credit to others. So how can companies intervene when there are teams where employees come to work with knives out and they're just hot? People just coming in really hot here. So how can companies intervene when that's the case?
Yeah, it's sad. Like that exists. It exists a lot. I think I've worked in environments like that, and it's rough. It takes so much emotional energy, and it's not the best for the organization. I think if we talk from an organizational perspective, it needs to be a clear and strong decision. Like that is not acceptable. Like that is not the culture that we want. If you're coming with knives out, or a top performer can act any way that they want to act. This is like the no assholes rule type of thing, like that, and just don't accept that. And that has to be kind of done repeatedly, very quickly, and you manage them out of the business. So I think in today's society, you're probably getting more assholes, right? And these are people from a philosophical perspective where that they believe the rules don't apply to themselves, right? And consistently, I'm above the rules. I don't need to find it. I'm special, or I'm entitled because of whatever way. And if you explain to this type of person, they're not going to follow the rules. There's going to be some rationalization in their brain, like, why I don't need to do it. Or they might smile, but just go back and do those kind of behaviors. So again, I think there's two types of dynamics. Those that are just unaware from these sour relationships, and they're going to try to interact with you from their value system and what gets them excited. And if it's different from yours, and you have conflict because you argue so much when you think it could go easily, and that happens many, many times, and it feels sour because of that, well, that might be just a lack of awareness and a lack of understanding. And if you bring kind of some third-party data, like here is my motivators and here's yours, and maybe this is what we're going on, like, oh wow, we have customers that get together and they just start laughing, like it was really difficult to work together for a long time, and now we look at this and we laugh. It's all right there. And if you have something kind of in between you, where it's not me and you kind of talking against each other, where it can be emotional and defensive, that adds an ease to try to overcome those. So I think you have to kind of classify which of these two types of relationships it is. And if they're the second person, you want to try to get them out. If you have the power to get them out, you don't want people that are just consistently think they're entitled to not follow the rules or not do what everybody else does.
That's so disarming too, right? If you don't have someone coming to you and saying you're the problem, even if that person is the problem, if they already behave that way, they likely do not want to hear it, right? So if you have a neutral look, these are characteristics, these are values, these are neither good nor bad, they are just descriptors, right? This is just who you are, and this is who this person is. And like you said, oh, this makes so much sense. This is why I haven't agreed with you on anything, because we just don't value the same things. We have an audience question that I believe you just addressed. What does your study of intrinsic motivation say about how managers can analyze and fix communication problems that individuals like Mike have? I guess, on the individual, like if you have a manager or people manager mid-level who's got 3 to 5 employees, does it look different in application when it's a really small group versus a really large at scale? What differences would you draw there?
No, like intrinsic motivations are unique to each individual. What we tend to see, and like this isn't a hard and fast rule, like teams that operate well and they've been together, for a fair amount of time and they operate at speed and decision making, their kind of value, like system or their map tend to fall pretty aligned. And they can have very different experience. They can be very different outside looking type of thing like that, very different identities, but their internal values are relatively simple. So they can kind of, I mean, relatively aligned and relatively similar. So they tend to move much quicker. If, you know, you have teams where, whether it's 3 people or 7 people, and you have kind of values all over the place, that's where just the chance of miscommunication and misunderstanding increase. So if we go back to that example of Mike, that was a case where, okay, let's bring in this third-party data. We brought in the Attuned intrinsic motivator reports, and oh, I totally understand like why, you know, we're just not seeing eye to eye on this issue. And both sides said, well, I could have probably responded a little bit different and said it a little bit, if I knew your values, and said things a little bit different. And I think to answer the question, that's what we need. And this is the superpower, or kind of like, you know, this add-on to our brain that, all right, now you're dealing with Casey. So he's motivated by rationality and autonomy type of thing like that. So if he gets going, why, and he jumps in, he wants to debate, well, that's his motivation. And if you're just not up for it, just say, hey, Casey, I know you get really excited by that. That's wonderful. Right now, we just need to make this decision very quick. I don't want to deal with 5 whys. Let's kind of just get on with it. And if you have that information available at the right moment in time, for me, you're going to get the best out of me. And I'll be, oh yeah, sorry, Emily, I get carried away sometimes. And that's the kind of interaction you want, right? Rather than you get kind of grumpy and then I get defensive and then we just spiral negatively. So it's the timing of it is also very important. This goes back to the nudges, right? So if we're looking at scale and we want to have kind of this add-on to our brain to overcome when we're dealing with people we don't deal with all the time as well, and that's especially or cross-functionally or cross-project-wise type of thing. This is where, you know, the ability of technology to give nudge, hey, you're going to meet Casey. He can be a little bit rough, you know, sometime, like, why don't you ask him this? Or just keep this in mind. And that person will be properly framed when they're interacting. And I think that's kind of the beauty of technology to help us, you know, get past these evolutionary constraints of our brains.
Okay, so in the States right now, there's a lot of talk about recession. Big tech companies are laying off workers. That's been all in the news the last couple of weeks. Lots of companies are reporting less than inspiring earnings, which all of this can be really demotivating for employees, especially the ones left behind after a layoff. It just can feel like a burden, how much more work you have to do. How can employers buoy morale when there isn't a lot of good news to share and use the principles of intrinsic motivation to do that?
I think that's where that last mile relationship is very important. When I mean that last mile relationship, okay, it's the manager or the leader to that team member, to that employee, and to have regular one-to-one communication. So if you have a culture of one-on-ones, probably increasing the frequency of one-on-ones is very important. If you don't have a culture of one-on-one, you should make sure, okay, the manager is speaking to each team member regularly, whether it's just a lot of 30-minute time, where that person can feel understood. And that ability for them to talk about what their problems are, you know, okay, I have too much work, and maybe the manager can help them prioritize and take some of that burden away. Or, you know, I'm really worried about this. These are some of my worries. And if the manager can hear, maybe the manager can't help them, but they can at least listen. And okay, we've kind of taken some of the weight off of that. So I think for organizations, you can do stuff at the organization level. Leaders can speak and okay, here's our mission type of thing. We have to kind of get on with it and give as much clarity as you possibly can. But the real part comes to that manager and the one-on-one. And, you know, if you're a manager or if you're an organization starting to think about, you know, layoffs or restructuring somebody, you want to make sure that that communication comes from that manager in a one-on-one, like it's just us together. Like if I'm the employee, I don't want to be receiving this collectively. I'm not in a room with a bunch of people, okay, you're all fired type of thing, or I didn't get an email, I didn't get an email. And it's where it feels impersonal. You know, we don't feel valued or understood or meaningful as an individual, where I'm going to go out and vandalize a facility because I'm angry, or I'm going to go out and write something on social media really, really nasty because I'm angry. So prioritizing to make sure those one-on-one communications happen and creating an infrastructure and pushing for that from the organizational level, I think is the best thing you can do on both sides of that. If you have the anxiety before something might happen, and then after, okay, how can we regroup and how can we get focused?
What you said about tailoring that and delivering that information on an individual level in a one-on-one from manager to employee. I'm going to reference the Axios study again because it was really good. There were 66% of communication leaders or leaders who are communicating big messages to companies. They say they know what updates employees need. 31% of employees agreed with that. That's not that's not lining up. So a way to solve that would be to work on the individual level so that you can address those updates. What information do you need? What do you want? We have an audience question as well. You mentioned infrastructure for communication. This person asks, do you think companies should produce guidelines for communication? And what's the best way to develop these?
It's a very good question. Like guidelines, I would personally say no, because just from my own motivation, I think like guidelines don't necessarily scale per se. They, you could have checklists or type of thing like that, but if somebody is not motivated, and I'm going to put it in Attuned's value term, like by security, so this goes back to process or having kind of things clearly mapped out. If that's not a motivator, and that's not a motivator for me, okay, I'm going to look at these guidelines written by somebody very far away. Do I really want to follow these in my, relationships? Probably not. I'm going to throw it over there. So when I think of infrastructure, it's those two aspects that kind of started things off is, okay, the infrastructure of creating psychological safety. Are you have a culture of that? Are you aiming for that? Are you measuring that? Are you able to take those measurements to try to improve? And having that type of infrastructure, I think, is very important. If you're going to have the psychologically safe environment, you're going to do dramatically good things for the communication within that team and across teams if you have that. And then the other part is that one-to-one individual communication. Okay, are you having one-on-ones? Are those set? Do you have a tool like Attuned where we can understand each other a little bit more deeply, a third party, so to bring that communication? That type of infrastructure rather than a guideline. Are people going to go to the website and download it or wherever you have these guidelines when they need it? Probably it's not going to happen with people there. So I'd say psychological safety plus that one-on-one infrastructure is what you need.
You did mention checklists. Is that something that you've used?
I have used in my past, like when I was a younger manager and kind of coming up and I'm trying to, be the best type of person, like, okay, what do I need to do to kind of go through here? Checklists certainly can prevent failure in some ways, like you remember things because you've had a bad experience, or I think pilots say like checklists are written in blood, right? Or sorry, not the greatest metaphor, but like they can do it. So I've written checklists, I've been involved in checklists, even when it comes to communications or one-on-one, like, are you going through this? But the problem there, it gets too scripted and less personal and gets away from the original value of that to understand, so to be dynamic. So I think if you're going in as a manager or leader and you want to talk to this one-on-one, you can just ask two simple questions. What are you excited about? What are you worried about? Right? And start off with what are you excited about at the top. It's culturally acceptable. Somebody starts, getting excited. Then, okay, the real value one that you want to hear is, okay, what are your problems? What are you worried about? Tell me about you. And because you've kind of broken the ice with that culturally acceptable question, you can do that.
When does knowing someone's values ever hinder a relationship? For example, let's say you go into a meeting with your manager and you've learned that they very much value competition, and that doesn't register very high with you. Is it possible for that person who doesn't value competition or doesn't value financial aspects of things to go in a little bit hesitant, reserved, nervous? If I know I'm going up against a competitive person, I might be more likely to shrink. For example, in college, I hated ultimate frisbee because people who play ultimate frisbee love ultimate frisbee. I'm not good at it and I'm not competitive in that way. So guess what? I never played ultimate frisbee again. So that's happening in the workplace, certainly, once you know about someone else's values. What do you do in that case?
That's a wonderful question and a wonderful story. Thank you. Like, I'm bringing these kind of two dynamics. So, like the intrinsic motivation, this is the one-to-one, kind of that individual dynamic that you're raising here, and then psychological safety, right? So, if we kind of make a like a quadrant, like 4 squares, is you could be very motivated in your work, right? Your motivators are being met. But if you're going into a meeting with your ultimate Frisbee manager and you just don't feel safe to speak up, like, I'm not motivated, like you're going rah, 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 let's hit these targets, here are the incentives, we're going to beat the competition, we're going to do all this, we're going to, like, no, you're just demotivating me, I'm not excited for that. Can you say that? How high do you judge that interpersonal risk? Like, does it take a little bit of courage to say that, or take some courage? Well, okay, that's probably a decent environment. If you can't say it at all, then you don't have psychological safety there. You're not perceiving that there's psychological safety there, and you could be somewhat motivated in your job, but you're not going to be in this best space. You're going to be in a high anxiety zone. So you're motivated, but you can't really express yourself. You don't feel understood. You don't feel valued. And where we want to get it is psychological safety plus this motivation. This is where you get peak performance.
I was not valued in the ultimate Frisbee community. I'll just say it was not their loss. Don't worry about it. Then how does that
I think their loss.
how does that manager learn that? If someone doesn't feel like they can say, I don't like ultimate Frisbee, they might not say, I don't feel comfortable saying that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The direct report may not offer that information. And so the manager may never know.
And that goes about setting, okay, what are the behaviors and the culture of psychological safety? So if, as an organization, as a manager, we value this, then I would like you to speak up, and I'm going to be almost offended and mortified at myself. Like, why didn't you tell me you don't like ultimate Frisbee? Like, I thought I knew a person. I thought I knew you, but like, we're together for a year and now you told me you hate ultimate Frisbee. Like, okay, I was doing something wrong in our relationship to not give you that space, or to make you feel it was too difficult to overcome that wall to say that to me. So I think that's where, as an individual manager, if you're trying to improve yourself and trying to improve your team, like, maybe, are you asking questions? Are you excited, or what are you worried about? Like, asking some of these things that might be able to pull that out. And if you do that over time, you're going to feel safer to be able to do that.
So as companies change, people come, they go, there are reorganizations. How do employers on a macro level take care of people's psychological safety as things shift and move, and continue to maintain that culture of communication? I'm thinking specifically about these companies where 11,000 people have been let go. How do you keep that going, especially while there's, the waters feel very churned up right now?
It goes to the values of the company and the culture of the company. Like, how are things done around here? So if you didn't have psychological safety at that 11,000 person company beforehand, you're not going to have psychological safety after, right? Things are going to be in turmoil, and there's going to be a lot more emotion, a lot more anxiety to make it harder to build that. So if you have psychological safety beforehand, it's going to be easier to maintain that. You might have to change some behaviors. And especially if you did, like, as an organization, restructuring or laid people off, and you didn't do it in that one-to-one way where people were worried, then you can reduce psychological safety. You can bring it down, right? And you're going to have to take actions to bring it back up. And I think going back to the question is, kind of, humans are kind of big picture motivated. Is like, we want to have affinity. We want to be part of a group, and we're going to do that. So, if we're bringing new people in after this stuff, and they're going to assimilate generally to what is the culture, what is the norm over time. So, as people, we want to be autonomous, we want to be ourselves, but we also are a social species and need to assimilate. And this one is generally stronger. And for most people, they're going to suppress their own needs to kind of go to the group. So if you have good group dynamics where there is psychological safety, okay, they're going to assimilate properly. If you have bad group dynamics, they're going to assimilate negatively on that side.
Don, an audience member, Don asks, what do you do when management encourages a eat or get eaten culture?
As a leader, it's going to be very hard, meaning that if you are a leader and you have the ability to change it, you have to bring the outside in, meaning you have to bring why this culture is not going to allow us to survive in 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. Do we need to be more innovative? Is the marketplace changing? We have very aggressive and it has worked in the past, or it's worked for this, but because of the dynamics that are going on, it's going to be set us up to fail. So you can, if you're as a organizational leader and you're trying to change it, you have to bring the real world in and try to help people kind of feel pain or feel difficulty or why this is not right. If you're on the receiving end of that, okay, I'm a new person into an eat or get eaten culture. Hopefully you have another option, or you can look for other options and just go out. It's difficult to change that as one person just going in from kind of the lower or mid levels.
Mm. And I can empathize. I've certainly been in those scenarios where I felt like that was required of me. I really like this question from an audience member. While everyone's unique, there are trends in intrinsic motivation that change over time. And you mentioned this a little bit, it happens slowly. For example, people starting to care more about purpose than salary. Is it worth tracking these?
Absolutely, and I think it's a fantastic question. I think we all need a GPS to each other's motivations and each other's values, and especially like at work from a manager perspective. That okay, you've been working with Casey for 3 years now. If you haven't seen the latest information, you might be dealing with a different Casey. Like my motivations could have shifted because of my own life events. So, like even personally, I've mentioned my motivations. So high autonomy, high competition, high rationality. These are kind of my main one. But in the last year, we had a special needs baby, and I can really feel my perspective of the world and the demands on our daily life from having a special needs child, and the uncertainty, the anxiety has really changed my value. So like altruism is going up much higher. So going back to that purpose is this purpose in helping others and doing things for others where it wasn't a huge value. It's not to say I wasn't a nice person before, but this gets me excited. This is why I want to go to work. This is the meaning that I start to find. So yeah, I think we need to be very updated. Unless you knew that story, which I might not offer to everybody in my workplace, you probably wouldn't have an idea that maybe I'm shifting. Can you even make that gap? So yeah, I think we need an updated GPS to people as much as possible.
Yeah, and this could help people still be understood, even if they don't want to share information about their personal lives, because their colleagues are just seeing results anyway, right? And that may be all their colleagues need to be privy to. They may not need to know everything that's going on in their personal life, but to understand, oh, okay, Casey is really changing in this way. Good to know. Don't necessarily need to know the cause of that if you didn't want to share whatever event was occurring in your life. I imagine caregivers would experience this with adding children to a family, becoming a caregiver to a parent or even a spouse. Your values are really going to change in huge ways, and it may just not be altruism, right? It could be any number of things. So
might be financial needs or security or process. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So those motivations can change over time. Do you ever see them varying by scenario? For example, would I maybe value something? Would I have different values if I'm having a conversation with a colleague who's lateral to me? We're both people managers at the same level, but when I go talk to the CEO, am I valuing something else there? Or are people generally consistent across scenarios and interactions?
It's going to be the difference between behaviors and values is what you're getting to. So your values are going to be the same. So it's still the same, Emily. Like what makes you happy or what feels most natural to you will be the same in both of those scenarios. But your behaviors will change. Like, okay, the way I talk to a CEO is socially different, or the accepted norms of this are different than I would talk to a peer. So you're going to put a different hat onto that. I think what's very interesting is like, as we're starting to see these different networks and complicated, so we all have to change our behaviors and change our framing by the different people that we speak to. And how can we do this and how quickly we can do this? This is also very kind of difficult to shapeshift. So this is actually what our team of psychologists are quite excited about. Okay, all these different network examples, and like, how can I communicate in a psychologically safe way, or honestly with a peer might be easier than it is with a CEO or somebody else's different dynamics, and how can we minimize or change those behaviors so we can get proper frank communication. It's a problem we haven't totally figured out, and people I think sometimes don't get it right, just using the old natural methods as well.
I like this question from an audience member as well. What tools can we use on a large organizational level to encourage better communication? Are we going down the wrong path if we have feedback forms and use other digital means? These are really popular in HR tech right now, different types of, especially when you have a really, really large organization. Should we encourage more in-person opportunities, even in a remote/hybrid setting that many of us are in right now?
I think it's a fantastic question. I think the field of technological tools is getting more sophisticated, and I think over the next decade and even longer, we're going to see even more. So, feedback tools are useful. Okay, you're eliciting information, usually anonymously, that you weren't able to do it. But are you getting all of the information? Is it right for every person? So maybe the feedback that I give is going to be very different than the one that you might give, Emily. And some people just never feed it in. So I think with the feedback tools, you can get organizational size issues, like, okay, we're getting a lot of feedback on this is a problem, this is what we should improve, and you can fix something organizational, but it's not really going to fix one-on-one stuff unless there's a really, really broken relationship or a really toxic manager is probably not going to come through those. So it's one part of the evolution of being able to understand and motivate people. I think we need to get to more sophisticated ones where it's kind of one-on-one and looking at those one-on-one dynamics. And as you were just saying, okay, all of these changing interpersonal relationships that we have at work because of different power, distances or different statuses. And as you get to more kind of newer technology tools that are using deeper psychology, you're going to have more to that. And you can build on maybe this basic foundation that you're getting with the feedback tools. On the question about in-person, it really comes down to the company culture. There is something that happens when we're together. I think from day one, like when you have these in-person events and I have an in-person speaker, there's more excitement, more feeling, maybe more connectivity and more identity that you can get. There's just a lot more that happens in between us as humans in person. But does that motivate everybody? What is the frequency to do it? It's going to be different.
We'll wrap up with this question, and I'd like to know myself. This is from an audience member. They write, on a personal note, Casey, what inspired you to explore the impact of intrinsic motivation? Was it a particular epiphany?
I don't think it was an epiphany moment, but it was kind of just a lot of, this grief and frustration built up over time, just with my unique experience in the world and my own motivation. So I've said rationality that motivates me a few times. So, I come from like a talent perspective, like recruiting, did lots and lots and thousands of interviews. And I could never understood what motivates people with any objectivity, right? In an interview situation, people tell you what they want to hear, or maybe we don't use the same language and they would use language that triggers me, or vice versa type of situation. And what I would see is it's the difference between motivation, being successful and being a match for that environment or team where people go, and not is the long-term success of everybody. It's the happiness of that team, of the company hiring that person and that person kind of going into it. So that's kind of one aspect. The other is, like, I've been doing one-on-ones for 15 or years or 20 years, quite a long time, and I've been in these loops where it becomes Groundhog Day. Like the first month of a new joiner coming, I'm excited, try to get the most out of this person, try to make them feel inclusive and welcome, and we both go into the half-hour one-on-one every week, and the first month is pretty good, but by month 3 we're kind of saying the same things, and by month 6 it's a grind. Like going back to that 15 minutes before, it's like, I don't really want to do this. Why am I going to this? And I'm sure that member and other members, like, why do I have to go? Casey's gonna ask me 5 why questions. He's gonna do something high competitive. He's just gonna tell me, here's the goal for the week, leave me alone. And they needed something very, very different. So it's all the culmination of all of these things. Like, okay, why do we not understand each other's motivations? Why are we wasting so much time, doing things that are generally pretty good, but we can't communicate well? And it was these things with my desire for, okay, motivation for rational. Okay, let's go down this rabbit hole and see if we can solve this.
Well, Casey, thank you so much for your time. This has been very informative. I've learned a lot, and I've enjoyed our conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve at From Day One, who has a few announcements to close us out for the afternoon.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thanks a lot, both of you, Casey and Emily. That was really thoughtful and really candid. And I think we all appreciate that about what motivates people when they're communicating, how to understand that, how to respond to that. You both clearly have very high EQ, and it was great how you wove the audience questions into the conversation. So thanks again to Attuned for their support and to all of you who participated today. Before you leave, I'm going to put a link in the chat space again about our family caregiving survey done in cooperation with AARP. It's designed to gather data about how employers are supporting and seeking to support their workers with family caregiving responsibilities. If you weren't able to complete the survey earlier, we'll hope that you'll do so now. And finally, if you'd like to join us for more virtual programming, you can head to our website fromday1.co and check out more of our upcoming events. Our December virtual event is titled The Future of Jobs, Trends Shaping How We Work in 2023 and Beyond. That's happening December 7th. I'm putting the link for complimentary VIP tickets to that conference in the chat space right now. So we're looking forward to that, and we hope to see you there. On behalf of From Day One, thanks for attending this event. Super insightful. Thanks, everyone, and stay well. Bye for now.